chapter 7. We're going to take a slight detour and then get back to 20 and 21 in Judges. So we'll start with Joshua chapter 7 and reading at verse 1. And I'm going to read through all the way to 26 fairly quickly without any comment on this. And then we'll go back and compare this to Judges chapter 20. So as I read through this, think in terms of what the sin was involved, how the leaders of Israel responded, and then what the results of that were. Because there's some similarities and some differences here between the sin, how it was dealt with, and the results in what we looked at last week with Judges chapter 20. So we'll start with Joshua chapter 7, verse 1, and reading through the whole chapter fairly quickly. But the children of Israel committed a trespass regarding the accursed things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took the accursed things, so the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven, on the east side of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, Go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai, and they returned to Joshua and said to him, Do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not weary all the people there, for the people of Ai are few. So about 3,000 men went up there from the people, but they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai struck down about 36 men, for they chased them before the gate as far as Shebarim, and struck them down on the descent. Therefore the hearts of the people melted and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until evening, he and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Oh, that we had been content and dwelt on the other side of Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns its back before its enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear it and surround us and cut off our name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name? So the Lord said to Joshua, Get up. Why do you lie thus on your face? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant which I commanded them. For they have taken some of the accursed things and have both stolen and deceived, and they have also put it among their own stuff. Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their back before their enemies, because they had become doomed to destruction. Neither will I be with you anymore unless you destroy the accursed from among you. Get up, sanctify the people, and say, Sanctify yourselves for tomorrow, because thus says the Lord God of Israel, There is an accursed thing in your midst. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the accursed thing from among you. In the morning, therefore, you shall be brought according to your tribes, and it shall be that the tribe which the Lord takes shall come according to families, and the family which the Lord takes shall come by household, and the household which the Lord takes shall come man by man. Then it shall be that he who is taken with the accursed thing shall be burned with fire, he and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has done a disgraceful thing in Israel. So Joshua rose early in the morning and brought Israel by their tribes, and the tribe of Judah was taken. He brought the clan of Judah, and he took the family of Zerites. And he brought the family of the Zerites man by man, and Zabdi was taken. Then he brought his household man by man, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, the tribe of Judah was taken. Now Joshua said to Achan, My son, I beg you, give glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession to him, and tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me. And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and this is what I have done. When I saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. And there they are, hidden in the earth in the midst of my tent with the silver under it. So Joshua sent messengers And they ran to the tent, and there it was hidden in the tent with the silver under it. And they took them from the midst of the tent, brought them to Joshua and to all the children of Israel, and laid them out before the Lord. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him took Achan the son of Zerah, the silver, the garment, the wedge of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, "Why have you troubled us? The Lord will trouble you this day." So all Israel stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. Then they raised over him a great heap of stones, and still there to this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Therefore the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. So let's pray. Dear Holy Father, we thank you for this day that we can come together, look at your word, and worship you. Pray that you'd help us to understand your words and to apply them to our life. Pray that we'd prepare our hearts for communion in the morning service coming up a little later, and pray for Pastor Burns as he brings the message. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Joshua 7 and Judges 20 that we looked at in detail last week have some parallels in terms of what's going on, but also some differences in how the sin was dealt with. So first off, in Joshua 7, there was a sin of a small group, Achan and his family, that impacted all of Israel. In that, after defeating Jericho, Achan and his family had taken valuables from Jericho, hidden them. They were told not to do that. They were told to destroy everything in Jericho. And so because of this sin, Israel was not successful when they went up against Ai, which was arguably a much weaker city than Jericho and a much easier defeat. So in both of these cases, we have the sin of a small group affecting an entire people. In Judges 20, we had the sin of the group of perverted men in Gibeah and the Levite, as he was an accomplice to them, impacting all of Israel. So in both cases, in Joshua 7 and Judges 20, we have sin from a small group of people impacting a whole group of people. Sin of one individual carries over and impacts everybody that they're related to. Now, in Joshua 7, the immediate response when Joshua realized something was wrong when they were defeated at Ai is Joshua and the leaders fell before God in prayer. And not only that, as we read through, it wasn't just that they prayed, they fell on their faces, they put dust on their heads, which was a sign of just complete humility and complete contrition before God. And before Joshua acts, before the leader acts, they look to God for direction first. In Judges 20, that's not what we saw. In Judges 20, Israel did consult God. But they consulted God only after they had decided a very decisive action based on the immoral Levite's testimony. So they listened to the Levite's testimony. They did not investigate it. They didn't look at any further testimony. And the Levite's testimony was partially true but badly twisted. They raise up this army of 400,000 people. They decide that they are going to destroy Gibeah before they consult God. And when they consult God, they're not looking for a course of action. They're kind of looking to manipulate God into blessing their actions by asking God who should go up first. And interestingly here, the individual in Judges 20, not the individual, but the tribe that Judges is chosen is actually Judah. So a different response to sin here between Joshua 7 and Judges 20. From that, after Joshua goes with the leaders to God in prayer, he then unifies all of Israel by calling them to purify and sanctify themselves ceremonially before the next day. So they're all unified and called to purify themselves before they meet with God. Now in Judges 20, all of Israel is also unified. Well, except Benjamin, who wasn't invited. But in Judges 20, it's a much more evil picture. In the Joshua 7, they are called to purify themselves. In Judges 20, they're unified and called together by a message of a dismembered human being who has been sent out through the country. So they're coming because of this horrible act. Now, in both cases, it started with sin, but the response is very different. The response of how the leaders respond, in the case of Joshua, immediately consults God with humility. Whereas in the judge's case, they only consult God after they've made a decision. In both cases, the tribe of Israel is unified. In one case, they're unified by purifying themselves to meet with God. In the other case, they're unified over a dismembered human being. In Joshua 7, we then see the next day, after the Israelites have been called to purify themselves and ready their hearts to meet God, God is consulted here, but he's consulted to identify the guilty tribe. Whereas in Judges 20, they decided who was guilty based on just the Levites' twisted testimony. And instead, they consult God not to identify who is guilty and what their course of action should be, but rather they identify which tribe will go up first against Gibeon and Benjamin. The guilt they'd already decided based on the twisted, immoral testimony of the Levite, who he should have been one of the guilty parties included in this rather than being the ringleader that was being followed. So in Joshua 7, God is consulted to find the guilty party and course of action. Where Judges 20, the people of Israel has already decided their course of action, have already acted as judge, and are now just asking who should go up to fight against Gibeah Benjamin first. It's kind of interesting in both chapters, Judah is the tribe that's selected. For different reasons, but Judah is the tribe that's selected. Additionally, something also interesting about these passages, both of them occur in the area surrounding Bethel. Geographically, they're in the same location. And I think those are kind of contextual clues that the reader, when they hit Judges 20, is supposed to think back to Joshua 7 and say, wait a minute, there's some things that sound similar here, but there are some things that sound very different here. And then finally, we have what was the end results of this. So in Joshua 7, initially, Ai defeated the Israelites and 36 soldiers died. Not because of their direct sin, but because of the sin of Achan and his family affecting all of Israel. The next outcome was Achan, his family, and livestock were killed for their sin. The guilty parties were punished. And then Israel went on to have victory at Ai. Sorry about the smaller type here. It's just once we get to Judges 20, the list of end results here is quite long and really quite horrific. First, the results of the sin is that, well, there's a woman, the Levite's wife, who was physically abused, raped, and killed. There were 40,000 plus 30 Israelite soldiers who were killed. There were 25,100 Benjamite soldiers who were killed. So we already have over 65,000 from the tribe of Israel who killed here. Additionally, after the Benjamite soldiers were defeated, Israel continued after all of the Benjamite women, children, elderly men, any of the men who had not come out as soldiers, and destroyed all of the cities of Benjamin, such that there was only 600 Benjamites left hiding in the rocks of Rimmon. Something that might get lost in all of this is there's no specific mention of the fate of the guilty parties who did the sin. Now, it's very likely that the men, the vile, perverted rapists from Gibeah, they probably died in Gibeah. But nowhere does it specifically say that. We don't know. And that's partially because Israel's focus here is wrong. Israel's focus isn't about getting justice, it's about getting vengeance based on the Levite's twisted testimony. And not only that, we don't know the fate of the Levite. He was an accomplice in this. He was the one who shoved his wife out the door and gave him over to these men. He should have been dealt with as a guilty party also by Israel. They are not specifically mentioned. In Joshua 7, very specific details are given on what happens to the guilty party, Achan and his family. But here in Judges 20, after all of these people die in this fighting, we really don't know, did justice prevail here? Now, ultimately, we know that the actions of both the Levite and the men of Gibeah were judged by God, because there's many passages where God promises justice for those who are wronged. But in the immediate aftermath of this, we don't even know in Judges 20 where the guilty parties really even dealt with after all of this chaos and all of this killing. With Joshua 7, the next chapter is victory at Ai. In Judges 20, the next chapter is more damage to come in 21, which is where we're at now. It doesn't get better in chapter 21. And it should be, comparing these two passages, somewhat obvious why it doesn't get better. In Joshua 7, it should be obvious why it got better, because Israel turned to God for direction, they turned to God for deliverance, they turned to God for justice, and they followed God's words. In Judges 20, they didn't do any of those things, and instead they end up essentially oppressing themselves with this absolutely horrible event. So, Judges 21 is broken into basically three parts or three sections. We have verses 1 to 7 could be summed up as being some foolish vows that the Israelites have taken. Unfortunately, 8 to 15, verses 8 to 15 in chapter 21, the theme becomes Israelites killing more Israelites, unfortunately. You would have thought that after the civil war between Israel and the tribe of Benjamin, that there would have been enough of that for a while, but there's not. And then 16 to 24 comes back around kind of to where we began in chapter 19, violence against women. And then the book of Judges ends with the refrain, there is no king in Israel, and everyone does what is right in his own eyes. And this is part of, 21 is part of a larger section that consists of chapter 19 that we looked at 2 weeks ago, chapter 20 that we looked at last week, and then 21. So fitting those in, chapter 20 was really the theme there, was Israelites killing Israelites. And it all started with violent abuse of the Levite's wife in chapter 19. So 19, 20, and 21 work together in that they start with violence against a woman and end with violence against a group of women. In the middle, we have Israelites killing Israelites, and the core and the center of it is foolish vows, where they are more intent on not losing their honor by keeping foolish vows than they are having the attitude of Joshua of turning to God and asking God, what should we do? So let's take a look at the details here. So starting in Judges chapter 21, verse 1. Now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, "None of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife." So this is the first of two foolish vows. And this vow the Israelites made here at Mizpah, what they're referring to is when they first gathered together because of this dismembered body of the Levite's wife that was sent out, and they gathered and they listened to the Levite's twisted testimony. One of the things they did in response, before consulting God, was they vowed that they would not give any of their daughters in marriage to a Benjamite. Then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God till evening. They lifted up their voices and wept bitterly and said, "O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel?" And a couple things there. At first, it sounds really good. They're coming to God. They realize something's wrong. And like Joshua, they're coming to God. But there's a couple problems with this. They're kind of coming to God kind of late in the game. They've already, in this case, killed off all but 600 of the Benjamites, and there's only 600 male soldiers left in the tribe of Benjamin hiding in the rocks of Rimmon. They're the ones who did this. And their question to God is, how could this happen that one tribe is about to be cut off? In education we try to say, well, there's no stupid questions. Well, this one kind of borderlines on that. They've just been involved with a war that they have completely destroyed Benjamin, and now they come to God and they're crying and saying, why is our brother lost? Why is this tribe about to be missing? Well, if you've been paying attention, they should know because they just did it. Not only that, when they were fighting against Israel in chapter 20, they initially killed 18,000 Benjamite soldiers out of the 25,000 or so. And at that point, the tribe of Benjamin fled and gave up. At that point, they had surrendered. And from there, what the Israelites did after that point of surrender is they proceeded to chase them down and kill 7,000 more Benjamites after the Benjamites had surrendered and were fleeing. There could have been more than 600 men left. But Israel, after they had victory, decided that they would provide utter destruction and kill them. After they had killed those 7,000 and there were 600 hiding in the rocks, they then turned around and they went city by city to the Benjamite cities and killed all of the remaining women, children, and men who weren't in the military, burned those cities and destroyed them. Had they stopped a little sooner, there wouldn't have been this issue of only 600 Benjamites left. They should know why this tribe is almost cut off, because they just did it. So they're asking God the wrong question here. But there's something else also. When Joshua in chapter 7 of Joshua went to God, he didn't act until he got a response. Here, in verses 2 and 3, they pray to God, they ask God a question, and in verse 4, we see that they do not wait for an answer. They proceed on with a course of action without waiting for any answer at all. They're using prayer wrong here. It's kind of best to wait for an answer. So it was in verse 4, so it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So they do make some offerings here, though notably there's one missing, and that is a sin offering. They're not giving a sin offering. So even when they've asked this question, why is Benjamin, almost ceasing to exist as a tribe, they don't understand that there's sin involved here and don't offer a sin offering. But after they give these offerings, again, they don't wait for a response from God. The children of Israel said, "Who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with the assembly to the Lord?" For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, "He will surely be put to death." So this is a second foolish vow that they made back at Mizpah before the war with Benjamin. They had made two. One was they wouldn't give their daughters to marry any Benjamites. And the second was anyone who did not contribute and help would be put to death. So they've decided here, they're like, well, we've got a problem. The tribe of Benjamin is almost wiped out. We have to do something about that. And they're like, wait a minute. Was there anybody who didn't come and help us wipe out the tribe of Benjamin? We'll go find them and wipe them out as part of the solution. This is just dizzying logic here, or illogic. And so verse 6, "And the children of Israel grieved for Benjamin their brother and said, 'One tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters as wives?'" So like, okay, there's 600 of them left, but once they die, that's it. They realize, well, we made an oath that we can't break, that we won't give them daughters to marry. They're not supposed to go and marry foreigners. They can't do that. So where are we going to get wives? And they link the two oaths together in verse 8, and they come up with the following plan. And they said, "What one is there from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Mizpah to the Lord?" And in fact, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent out their 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, "Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male, every woman who has known a man intimately." So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So they come up with this plan. They don't wait for God. They come up with this plan so they don't have to break either of the vows that they made. And so they combine both of them here. And they decide, okay, we made a vow, we can't give our daughters in marriage. But Jabesh Gilead didn't come to Mizpah, so they didn't make that vow. So their women are fair game. But since Jabesh Gilead didn't come, we also swore a vow that we would wipe them out. So let's go wipe them out and then abduct the virgin women from Jabesh Gilead and give them to the Benjamites as wives. Problem solved. In an absolutely horrific way. They're going to Jabesh Gilead, and they're kidnapping and abducting 400 young women. And in this culture, very likely 400 young women, if they weren't married yet, were likely in the age range of maybe 12 to 16 years old, something like that. Not only that, before they abduct them, they're killing all of those women's fathers, mothers, siblings, destroying them, and handing them over to the Benjamites and saying, "Here, get married. Have a good life." This is not at all how God planned marriages to be based on. This is more of a horrific example, really, of human trafficking, as opposed to what God's intention for marriage is. Whether it's arranged marriage or not arranged marriage, this is clearly not the way to do it. They've also marched out against Jabesh Gilead, which is an Israelite city, and they've applied what God commanded them to do to the Canaanites again. They did this against the Benjamites. In Deuteronomy 7 and chapter 7 and 20, we're not going to turn there, God commanded Israel to utterly destroy the Canaanite nations in the Promised Land. And there were 3 reasons for that. Justice for the evil that permeated the Canaanite culture. Secondly, to keep Israel uncontaminated from that Canaanite culture. And thirdly, to fulfill the covenant promise of that land to Israel. And so even though the tribe of Benjamin in chapter 20 was acting very Canaanite-like, this command was not a command that God gave as a general principle to the Israelites, go out and kill everybody who does this. There were specific nations that were specifically listed and specific reasons for that God had decided on. And so in Judges 20, they wrongly applied the utterly destroy command to one of their own, the tribe of Benjamin. And here in chapter 21, when they realize they've maybe overdone it and made a mistake and pretty much wiped out the tribe of Benjamin, they're trying to do damage control, and their approach to damage control is to do the same thing again. They're just repeating the same mistakes and not learning from them. And this is a problem. A couple of kind of incidental things. Jabesh Gilead shows up much later in the book of Samuel. We're not going to turn there, but in Samuel chapter 2, verses 4 through 5, Jabesh Gilead is a city that after King Saul is killed by the Philistines, they take his body and they bury it, and David blesses them for that. So Jabesh Gilead later are the ones who bury King Saul honorably, and David blesses them for that. King Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. King Saul is a Benjamite. He comes out of this tribe that was almost completely wiped out. There's another Saul that also came from the tribe of Benjamin, and that would be Paul. The Apostle Paul was originally named Saul after King Saul because he was a Benjamite. And you kind of think about that. The first king of Israel came from this tribe that the Israelites almost wiped out, but God preserved. The Apostle Paul came from that same tribe. Also, in verse 12, towards the end of it, where it says, "And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan." This is a kind of a subtle reference to reinforce Israel's failure. Shiloh is in, let's see, I'll go back to that in a moment. Shiloh should be in the land of the Ephraimites, should be in the tribe of the Ephraimites area. But here, Shiloh is not referred to, which is in the land of the tribe of the Ephraimites. It's listed as being, which is in the land of the Canaanites. It's a subtle reference that despite the fact that God gave that land to the Israelites, they have not claimed it. They have not completely taken it to be their own. They allowed Canaanite influence to stay there. They allowed and adopted that Canaanite influence. And here there's kind of a subtle indictment of that in that Shiloh here. And not only that, Shiloh at this point is equivalent to what Jerusalem would become. Shiloh is the seat where God's sanctuary is supposed to be at this time. So we have Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, is kind of an indictment against that.
Which verse is the Canaanites in?
Verse 12 of Judges 21. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. It's referred to as being in the land of Canaan, not the tribe of Israel's territory. Not. Go back to Joshua. they took that land. They took Shiloh. Where now there's this hint that they've allowed the Canaanite influence, that Shiloh is being referred to at this time as being as part of the land of Canaan, not part of the land of Israel, which is what it's supposed to be. Part of their problem here is they didn't do what God said in taking the land. Instead, they've adopted Canaanite ways, and they've out-Canaanited the Canaanites, basically. Not only that, in verse 12, they've abducted 400 virgin women from Jabesh Gilead after they killed everybody in Jabesh Gilead. There's another reference to abducting women in Judges. Back in Judges 5, we're not going to turn there. I put these references on the handout, but in the interest of time, we're not going to turn to all of them. But what I'm trying to do is, as we're getting to the last chapter of Judges here, Judges 21 has lots of references back to other things that happened in Judges. Some good, some not good. In Judges 5:30, in Deborah's song, Sisera's mother is thinking that Sisera is delayed because he has a woman on either arm. And that is a reference to the practice of, in a military conquest like that, the soldiers abducting women, taking them as property, and sexually abusing them and raping them. That's kind of what Israel is doing here. They're doing something that the other reference in Judges was a Canaanite practice, not an Israelite practice, and certainly not a godly practice in war. Now, in the case of Sisera, ironically, his mother thought he was detained because he had been victorious and he had this harem of women that he had abducted and kidnapped, and instead, he was dead because of a woman named Jael who took her tent hammer and tent peg and drove it through his head and put an end to him. Now, I have to say, this is kind of disturbing as that is, when I read chapters 19 through 21 here and what was done to the Levite's wife, I just kind of want this to end with Jael stepping up and, dispatching the evil men of Gibeah, and that sort of thing. It just seems a more fitting end, but we don't have that. However, it does add to the story, the narrative of Jael, as why she acted the way she did. She was a woman who was alone, and this general who is known for abducting women is in her tent. She didn't want to end up like the Levite's wife did, and so she acted in defense. So let's continue onward. Let's see. Jabesh Gilead, I should mention on the map there. Jabesh Gilead is to the east of the Jordan River, way north of everything that was happening in chapters 19, 20, and 21. So they traveled quite a ways to destroy this city and to abduct these women. So in verse 13, then the whole congregation sent word to the children of Benjamin who were in the rock of Rimmon and announced peace to them. So Benjamin came back at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and yet they had not found enough for them. There's 600 men, they have 400 women. Suddenly they do the math and like, oh no, we're 200 short. This is not going to work. And the people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a void in the tribes of Israel. And notice, they're grieving for the loss of Benjamin. They are not grieving for any of the evil that has been going on in any of these chapters. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed? And they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. So they still have this same problem that they started with. Now notice here, they don't even bother going to consult God. At the beginning of the chapter, they consulted God, but they didn't wait for an answer. And they went, wiped out Jabesh, kidnapped 400 women. Here, they're just like, we'll just figure out a solution on our own.
However, we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin. So it's back to that foolish oath. We can't do this. Now, kind of a quick comment on that. We talked about this back with Jephthah, and there are some kind of parallels here with Jephthah. The account of Jephthah included a foolish vow that Jephthah made. It included violence against his daughter, who was sacrificed after she came out dancing in celebration when he returned from victory. And it involved Israelites killing Israelites, and the Jephthah and the Ephraimites had a bit of a civil war in there, and there were 42,000 Ephraimites killed by Jephthah. So in chapter 21, we see the same three structural elements: foolish vows, violence against daughters, against women, and Israelites killing Israelites. One of the things that we looked at with Jephthah was that God made provisions, and these references are on the bottom of your handout for today. We're not going to take the time to turn there, but God made references that in Numbers 30, that vows should be taken seriously and not broken. But then in Leviticus 5, that when a foolish vow has been made, when the individual who made the vow realizes the foolishness of it, they should confess that as a sin, they should make a sin offering, and not be held to the vow. Well, that was the solution here to the vow that they made of not giving their daughters to marry with Benjamin. Realize this was a foolish vow. Make amends for that foolish vow and not be held to the foolish vow. But instead, they go and wipe out the city of Jabesh Gilead and abduct and kidnap 400 women. And then their second plan, when they realize that they're short 200, in verse 19 is, then they said, in fact, there's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon. Therefore, they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, go, lie in wait in the vineyards and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, and then go to the land of Benjamin. So now their plan is, there's this festival, there'll be virgin women celebrating and dancing. Kind of like Jephthah's daughter, when she came out to meet him, she was a virgin woman who was dancing in celebration. Except now it's on a much greater scale. Grab one of them, physically assault them, abduct them, and run away to the tribe of Benjamin before you get caught. So again, their solution here is, again, more violence against women, more essentially human trafficking and kidnapping. Now they realize there's going to be a little bit of pushback on this plan, because at Jabesh Gilead, they're like, there won't be any pushback because we killed everybody there. Not a good solution, but it was the solution they came up with. In verse 22, they anticipate that this will have some problems, but they figured out a solution to that. Then it shall be, when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, that we will say to them, be kind to them, be kind to the Benjamites for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war. For it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time, making yourselves guilty of your oath. So basically they're saying, well, when the men come and say, wait a minute, our daughters were just abducted, they can say, oh, it's okay though, because you're doing a good thing giving these wives to the Benjamites, and you're not guilty because you didn't break your oath. And that's what's evidently important here. Which it's a foolish oath that should have been broken, should have been confessed and then atoned for. So now their plan is to kind of cover this up. And the really disturbing thing is we don't see any additional pushback, which means these fathers and sons were like, yep, sounds good to us, let's go home. It's kind of subtle here, but it's horrible. That's not the response a daughter wants for her father to have. And so in 23, and the children of Benjamin did so. They took enough wives for their number from those who danced, whom they caught. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. So the children of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. They went out from there, every man to his inheritance. So everybody nonchalantly walks away from this situation. Everything's all good, and it is so not good. And then the narrator of the book of Judges ends with the refrain, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And this is the explanation to the question that was asked back in Judges 21, verses 2 and 3, when the Israelites came to God. They lifted up their voices and wept and said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel? It is because everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes and was ignoring God as king and deliverer. Our culture today is permeated with the idea of everyone doing what is right in his own eyes. Now, we dress it up and we call it postmodernism. Postmodernism is there are no absolutes. Morality, life in general, is relative. And what is true to you may not be true to me, but that's okay because as long as it's true to you, it's true. And as long as it's true to me, it's true. That's postmodernism. That was the problem back in Judges, and it's still a problem today. And it's not just in the world. Here in Judges, it was in the people of God. And today, this is a problem with people in general, acting as if what is right in their own eyes is right, rationalizing actions after the fact. And the only solution to that back in Judges, and the only solution to that today, is to yield to God as king and to look to God for deliverance from sin. Because in and of ourselves, we are not going to be successful. We need to rely on first looking at God as king, that he has set a standard that we need to follow, but then also to look to God for deliverance, because that's the only way we're going to even come close to meeting that standard. So a lot of things wrong in this picture. God's people consulting God, but not waiting for a reply. God's people ignoring God as a king. God's people doing what is right in their own eyes. We also see that God allows his people to face the consequences of their sin. But God also graciously provides deliverance despite sin. And it might not be obvious in this particular passage of where that fits in, but keep in mind where we started with the structure of Judges. Judges is not written chronologically. In fact, the events that we just went through in chapter 17 to 21, the Levite, Micah's Levite and the idols, and then 19 through 21, the Levite's concubine, and then the civil war. That very likely occurred chronologically at the beginning of the period of Judges. So the book of Judges laid out thematically to spiral downwards, but it's not laid out chronologically. In fact, it kind of comes back around full circle to where the book begins, not just thematically, but also chronologically in the events at the end occurred at the beginning of the book of Judges, which means that even after the horror of everything we've seen God's people doing in 19, 20, and 21, God still raised up after those events Othniel as a deliverer, Ehud as a deliverer, Deborah and Barak as a deliverer, Gideon as a deliverer, Jephthah as not a very good deliverer, but a deliverer, Samson as a deliverer. Kind of in the structure of the book, since it comes back around to events that were during the beginning of the period of Judges, God provided judges and deliverers that we looked at in this past unit after all of these events. I mean, think about that. I think most of in this room reading these events are just probably sickened and horrified at these events. And then God, who's perfect, was absolutely sickened and horrified with them. But he didn't give up on Israel. He still graciously provided deliverance. And then later deliverance that would culminate in David as king, and then Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So that theme of sin, oppression, and deliverance always is pointing back to the deliverance that God provides through Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Next week, we're going to be moving on and to the book of John, starting with John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. Hopefully, I'll be ready for that. And hopefully, I'll figure out the timing of that so that I end on time, maybe. Sorry. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for these words. Help us to look to you as King, look to you for deliverance rather than our own schemes that can fall apart quite badly as they did here for Israel. In Jesus' name,